eating and exercise took over my entire life.
So it just kind of cleanses your energy, our energy.
I love it.
We set a little intention. So just, you know, if you sharing this story can help inspire or motivate or strengthen one person out there to make their own comeback,
yeah,
you're doing a good thing.
Success.
I love it.
Okay, cool. So we are here with Lauren Power. Lauren, I'm going to let you give us the intro. Who are you? What do you do?
Well, hello, my name is Lauren Power. I'm 25 years old. I live in Toronto, Canada. And what I do career-wise is I am a wine importer and a wine educator. So I actually work with my family's business. We have a alcohol distribution company here in Ontario, and we work with small family wineries, kind of unique winemaking styles, unique grapes, unique wines, and we source those wineries and those companies from all over the world, giving them the opportunity to have their products here in Canada. About a year ago, I started doing a lot more one-on-one or group tastings, and in that it was really focused and still is very focused on helping just the average consumer learn what they need to know about wine. So I created these in-person experiences, which were really focused on just having fun, taking that like pretentiousness and uncomfortable, like expensive, all of those kinds of words that come into our head when we think about wine, taking all of that away and making it very approachable and very fun. Over the past 8 months, I've transitioned that into completely virtual experiences. So doing the same thing with groups, birthdays and all of those things that we're kind of missing right now, just getting people together from, pretty much all over the world. It's really cool to be able to facilitate these like social connections with so many different people now that I'm doing it on a virtual platform.
I know it's your family's business, but how did you go about getting involved in it?
Growing up, my family always used to kind of, I don't want to say make fun of me, but like I was always this kid that was like so dramatic and blew things out of proportion, and it was like this character trait that I had. So I grew up like very much struggling with myself, really, like inner things. I was super self-conscious, struggled with, predominantly a lot of body image issues. High school definitely started, even as young as elementary school, like having very, very disordered eating thoughts, and like very mild behaviors when I was very young. Same thing with high school, but going into university and like being on my own and all of that, it really, like the eating disorder stuff became very, very, very prominent in my life. So, going without getting, into too much detail about that, but, it was very, very toxic, but also it's very confusing. Like the way that I always describe eating disorders is it's very confusing, because one day you think that this is the way you need to eat and work out and exercise and you need to look like this, and then the next day it's something completely different, because you're so growing up in the age that we're growing up, we're so consumed with so many different like media sources, but so much information, right? Like you hear one person's on a keto diet, you hear one person only eats carbs, you hear one person runs on the treadmill for 3 hours. And for me, it was like, I felt like the more knowledge I had and the more I had access to, the better. And I would eventually find the thing that worked for me. So it was like constantly changing it. And in that, my mood was constantly changing and my body was like deteriorating with the different things I was doing to it so aggressively. And again, that changed from like, anorexia, bulimia, like chewing and spitting. And then that went on for about very severely for like 3 or 4 years. When I graduated school, I was very, I say like, and I've talked to a couple people, who struggled with eating disorders, and a lot of people have, when you're really in it, it's like, you feel like you're the most determined person in the world. You have this like sense that, what you're doing to try and lose weight and look a certain way is so hard, and you see other people like eating normally and, maybe not exercising or exercising in a different way. And to me, it was always like, I'm like mentally stronger than them. Like they don't know how to do it properly, right? And I was always so determined to be like the best at losing weight. And it really translated into like different parts of my life. So with my career, I didn't know what I wanted to do. And I ended up in this job in advertising, and I was working like crazy hours. And I was, I wasn't taking care of myself. I was doing these crazy diets and all of this. And I was living on my own, and, none of my friends had lived downtown yet where I was living. And I felt so lonely. And I was, doing myself a disservice by working in that industry and, not being able to give it my all, because I wasn't giving anything my all. The only thing I was giving my all was losing weight. And in that, the binge eating started becoming very predominant. And I guess another thing that I want to communicate that I find super important is when I was losing weight, it was like I was being congratulated like left and right. It was my family, my friends, even people that didn't know me, people who had maybe seen me before and seen me lost weight. They would, and this is totally like something, that we do in society. It's like you see somebody lose weight and you instantly congratulate them. It's like, oh my God, you look amazing. I'm so proud of you. You look awesome. And because we think that being thinner is the best, right? And we assume that that's everybody's goal. And, in reality, I was literally killing myself to look like that. And it was actually the most unhealthy thing I could have been doing, right? But people assumed it was what I wanted to do. And people who knew me, right? Like my friends, my family, like losing weight was the most important thing to me. So it was always something I was talking about. But, people that I didn't even know, that had no idea that I wanted to lose weight, right? Them still being like, you look amazing, congratulations. It's this kind of twisted thing that, we all think about, and I was doing. And I even sometimes still find like, I'll see someone and say, oh, they look different. And I'll have to stop myself. Like, it's not right to congratulate them, because I don't know why they lost weight and why they did that, and if that was something they even wanted to do, right? Anyway, so going back into after graduating and everything, and the binge eating was super was happening, every day. And that was kind of like the last stage of the really bad eating disorder. But the gaining weight very fast was then when, my family and my friends were like interjecting, and they were like, hey, maybe you're doing something wrong, or maybe there's something wrong, because now you're gaining, right? And it was like this, when I was losing weight, like everybody was so happy for me and whatever. And then when I was gaining, it was like, that's when everybody started being concerned. And in reality, my body needed to gain weight, right? But it was, anyway, so I was gaining weight very, very fast. And at that point, I knew that there was something wrong. Like my emotions were like all over the place. Like I could barely work. Like I remember my boss coming to me one day, and we had gotten this new account, and she came up to me and she was like, I really want you on this account. Like I am like really like to her boss, like I am vying for you to get this position, but I feel like you just don't want to be here. Like it was so evident to everybody that I was so miserable and like sad and drained, and I was always in like this big cloud over my head, right? And from there, I couldn't even be by myself. So I was Ubering to my parents' house, which was an hour away from my office. Wow. To just sleep there. And then I would Uber back in the morning because I couldn't be alone. And I couldn't, I just was so, I felt like I needed someone to like take care of me, because I couldn't even trust myself to make decisions. Mm-hmm. And it was so crazy because I was at my parents' house one weekend, and my mom had come downstairs, and she had told me that somebody that I grew up with, who I was really close with as like a young child, had passed away. And I instantly started crying, and I started crying. I was really upset, obviously, and nobody, knew what had happened. And, she was obviously very young. She was the same age as me. And this wave came over me, and I was like, I'm next. Like, if I don't do something, like that's going to be me, because I was just so deep in a hole. And, from the eating disorder and from all of that, like came super bad anxiety, came super bad depression, and came, a lot of like suicidal thoughts, and, a couple of attempts. And it was like, I knew that I either had to make a decision to keep going and like, you know, basically let myself do whatever I was going to do, or I had to make a change in some way.
It's like a lot of people don't realize that like nutrition affects your emotions and your hormones.
100%.
All these chemicals in your body are literally reacting to what you're putting in your body. So it's like hearing you say that you had all of these things, that you couldn't even work, you couldn't focus, you had anxiety. I mean, it's like, it all makes sense, you know, when you like look back on it.
Totally. Even now, I know if I go like 3 or 4 hours without eating because I'm working and I'm getting super bitchy, I'm like, go get a snack. Like your body needs fuel, right? So anyway, that day I called my doctor and I went in and he wrote me, he was like, I think you need to take some time off work. And I was like, I can't take time off work. I'll do anything else. He's like, so I tried a couple more weeks. I couldn't do it. And I was like, okay, I guess I'm going to take time off. And I took a couple weeks off, and in that had another like very, very bad episode, and another suicide attempt. And in that, and the next day it was like the craziest day ever. And I woke up the next morning and I was going to therapy, and my dad was like, I need to come with you, because, and he, you know, later told me, he was like, I knew that like that was going to be the last day of like this whole thing where like you were allowed to make your own decisions. And he came to my appointment, and it was my therapist was like, I actually need to call the police because of what you told me happened yesterday. And I actually like, I legally can't let you leave here because of what you did. And I was so scared of my dad. Thank God, like my dad is my best friend. I love him so much, but he like truly saved my life, because it was so like, I've never been so scared of anything. And he was like crying, and he was begging to the doctor. He's like, please let me take her. He's like, I'll take her to our doctor. But I need to like be in control of what happens, because if she has to like go into the psych ward at the hospital, like I won't be able to like make sure she's safe or take care of her. And he luckily said that was okay. And basically my dad went in to talk to our family doctor, and I sat in the waiting room for like 4 hours, and I was just waiting. I was texting my dad, I'm like, can I come in? He's like, no, like, I'll tell you when you can come in. So about 4 hours later, they all like, there was like a team of them, they all came out, and they were like, okay, like come inside. And they showed me this pamphlet, and they gave me the phone, and they were like, you can call them if you have any questions, but this is where you're going and this is what's happening. And I was like I had no clue what was going on. So basically in that, like the next day I went to a treatment center, actually in the same town I went to university in, which was super bizarre, but it was about an hour and a half out of the city. And I spent 2 months there. I lived there, and it was just like a full on like therapy. Like it was like rehab, but I mean, I wasn't, you know, diagnosed addicted to any drugs or alcohol. But it was the same thing. It was like mental rehab, physical rehab. Even my body it didn't even react to food properly. Like I had messed it up so much that my body didn't even trust itself. So it was like 2 months of that. And then I spent 2 months there. And when I got out of tying it back to your real question or your first question, when I got out of treatment, I knew that I couldn't go back into what I was doing with my job. It was just the hours were too crazy, and I knew I needed time. So my parents, you know, it was never really my intention to work with them, and I didn't want to be honest. And they were like, why don't you just come 2 days a week, help us plan this event that we had, and then at least you have something to do to keep your mind busy. And so that happened, and I worked a couple days a week, and that was 3 or 4 years ago now. So now I'm here. I just never left.
Wow.
That's amazing. Back to that like rock bottom moment where it seems like, you know, you're in the waiting room, you're just waiting for your dad to tell you to come in, it's hours going by. when they told you like, this is what's happening, like, how did you feel? Did you feel like a sense of relief? Did you, I mean, obviously I'm sure there was fear and other things mixed in, but like, what was your gut reaction to that like life-changing moment?
Yeah. It was relief for sure. That was like the first thing I felt, because I felt like it was the first time that everybody had heard, not just heard what I was saying, but they listened and they made a plan for that. Because I knew what was happening, and it took me a couple years to even figure out I had an eating disorder, right? I thought I was just like super into fitness and health, but I couldn't make a decision to like put myself in a treatment center. I didn't have that, like, I couldn't do that. I just like mentally, I couldn't get myself there and like to ask for that. And knowing that like the person who like loves me and cares for me and knows what's best for me, which is my dad, was involved with like a team of professionals to make that decision. It was like, I know whatever's happening next is the best thing that can happen to me. So like, I just felt relief. And I felt that knowing that I didn't have to go back into the same scenario mentally and physically that I was 2 days before that was so relieving, because I couldn't, and just again, having the control of like making my own decisions, even down to what I was eating, right? Like I was so scared to make any decision because I couldn't trust myself anymore. So knowing that I could put my trust in somebody else was so relieving to me.
How do you know that you go from just what every girl feels, because everyone has some kind of like body dysmorphia to a degree, but how do you go from it being like the average amount that everyone kind of deals with to knowing like, no, this is a problem?
I'll talk about, I guess, like the most extreme side of things, and how when I got to that, I was like, I know this isn't healthy or normal. I mean, there were so many things in between that probably somebody who had a little bit more sense than I did at the time. I was really young when all of this started happening, and I didn't have like the education and I mean, even the tools, right, that I have now to make better decisions. So it was like a mix of this mess of like needing to look a certain way, but also being very immature. So I'm sure there were a lot of, there's a lot of things in between, but I guess again, on the extreme side, it was eating and exercise took over my entire life. Like I couldn't wake up without worrying about what I was going to eat. I couldn't go to a restaurant without being super anxious and looking up the menu beforehand. I couldn't go on vacation and I couldn't enjoy any part of my life, because everything that we do involves food, right? Not to discredit anybody who is like a recovering alcoholic or, in AA or is struggling with alcohol or drugs, but it's like when people go through that part of their lives, if they're getting, recovery from being addicted to those substances and they come out, right? Like the best thing that they can do is put themselves in situations where they know there won't be any drugs or alcohol. But unfortunately with food, like we can never put ourselves in that situation. We need food to survive. So I remember being in treatment and talking about this, and somebody had said, they were like, it's like learning to tame the lion and then walk with it. Because you need to, right? You need food, you need to incorporate it into your life, but you need to fix your relationship with it first and still have it in your life to recover from it. When we talk about actually being like, being in recovery from these things or being better, it's like having a safe space is the most important thing, right? Like to feel like you're constantly in, like you need to have a space, and it needs to be a physical space. It also needs to be a mental space, right? Or people who are safe, who regardless of what you're doing, what you're saying, how you're acting, will treat you with love and support. They might not like you at the time, or they might be angry and pissed off at you and think you're ridiculous, but they need to have that love and support for you. To have that safe environment for yourself.
What advice would you give to somebody who's in a similar situation but might not have a supportive family or someplace or a support team behind them to kind of help them with this bottom situation?
Right. Totally. So I guess when I first went into, I mean, even before then, like when I was like, looking at new diets and new supplements and whatever, right? I had financially, my parents, at the time were supporting me. So I, could hide these charges on my card for like school things and, buy all of these supplements and do all of these things. And it, so, in that, I mean, there's good and bad to that. Obviously we see that, right? But when it came to recovery and going to therapy and doing all that, my parents were great because they were so supportive of that. They're like, don't worry about the financial side of things. Like, we will help you. Like, you'll be okay. And, in that I got to do a lot of trial and error and a lot of experiments with a lot of different things. And, the final treatment that I went to, the big treatment center, it was really expensive. And when I first saw it, I was like, I'm not going. Like, even though I felt like I needed to be there, I couldn't like fathom thinking about my parents spending that much money on me getting better, because I didn't know if I could get better. That was the other thing. Like, this stuff isn't like guaranteed, right? It's not like, it's not like you break your arm and your arm's put in a cast and 99% of the chance you're going to be okay in 6 months or however long that is, right? I knew that it was up to me at that point. Like, I could have all the resources and everything in the world, but if I didn't take it seriously, or if I didn't put the effort that I needed to in it, and I didn't know what those things were, I didn't know how much effort to put in, I didn't know how to do it, right? So I was also really scared in that. I was like, this is going to be a waste. So I remember calling my cousin, who was like my other biggest support, and I said, like, I can't have them spend money like this. Like, this is out of control. And her first daughter she's 12 now, but she has a really severe peanut allergy. And she said, if Olivia was having a reaction to peanuts and she was going to die, and you could give her a pill and it costed the same amount that your treatment did, would you buy it for her? And I was like, of course I would. She's like, so then what's the difference? Like, you're saving your life, because that going down this is going to lead to what would happen to her. And that was like a big eye opener for me. So, but I felt really guilty, I guess, going into it, and did while I was there. And when I came out of treatment and, I kind of started getting back on my feet, I started taking that as I really worked on changing my mindset around that. And it was like, can most people afford to do the thing that I did? Not only afford it, but do they have somebody in their life who can support them to that point, right? Like, who can even get them there, and mentally, right? Or even physically. And so in that, like, I really do try, to use my platform or even myself to communicate and talk about mental health and make it, try and give as much advice as I can when it comes to these things. And, I always say, like, on my Instagram, even though it's super focused on, wine and my career and what I'm doing, like, I always do make it a point to talk about mental health and how important it is. And, to remind people, like, I would never be here unless I got to that point. And not only would I not be here, but I wouldn't be the person that I am today. Like, I wouldn't have, I wouldn't be successful in anything that I'm doing if I didn't experience, like, the depths and, like, the work that it really took to, like, dig myself out of that hole.
Something you said that was really interesting about going into treatment and not knowing if you were going to even come out of this, I guess, better or being okay. Like, what was that like? What did that feel like? And going through treatment then, did you have that in the back of your mind the whole time?
Yeah. So I think that's another thing, like, with recovery, or I don't like to use the word getting better, because I still struggle with my eating disorder every single day, but I know how to manage it 1,000 times better than I used to. So I never say like those things go away, and I don't believe that they go away. And I don't think that that should be anybody's goal, is to like recover and get better from this. Like when I refer to recovery, it's like having a better relationship with those things. Like, you know, do I still suffer with depression? Yes. Like I take medication for it. I do all of that, but I have a much better relationship and understanding of my depression. So I know how to better manage it every single day. So yeah, like being in treatment, right? And I guess progress like that, not only is it not linear, but you can't see it, right? It's not like you can get an x-ray and be like, oh, you're halfway there or whatever, right? I always try and compare it to like, you know, actually breaking a bone or doing something physical like that. But so with that, it was, you know, in treatment, I was getting better. And then I was, you know, having these episodes, and it was like, am I getting better? Like, what do these things mean, right? Like, is having an episode a step backwards, or is it a step forwards? Because I'm, you know, letting the emotions out and doing that. And I think that that's different for everybody. And you'll never really know that in the time. You just need to let it happen and move through it. But when I got out of treatment and I went home, I was like, I can't do this. Like, I can do this here, where I have a team of doctors and, you know, somebody making me food and monitoring, you know, me every time I ate. I couldn't leave the table for half an hour because I couldn't be alone 30 minutes after I ate in case I threw up or did whatever, right? So it was like, how do I go back? And I had my parents, right, who were versed in what to do, but it was like so different. I was like, I don't know if I'm going to be okay. And I was terrified. And then I went home, and then, you know, 4 months later, I ended up moving back out on my own, or with a friend. But even in that, I mean, the next two years, I would say probably 2 years, like, it was hard. It was really hard, because in treatment, you learn everything you need to do, and you can put that to use, you know, in that little bubble of things. And you could put that to use in that little bubble of your friends and family, which was kind of the next step, right? But being, you know, even having a job and being, I mean, in social situations, like, how do you navigate those things with all of those new tools, with people who don't know you and don't have compassion for you and don't know what you've been through or understand you at all, right? So that was, and I mean, I still am learning and growing in that space. So
what tools would you say helped you turn that fear of like, am I even capable of doing this, like, into motivation to say, I got this, I'm gonna stick with it, you know, I have everything I need, like, I'm committed to this. Like, were there any I guess either tips that you can give, or what worked for you to then have flip that switch of being like, can I do this, to like, I can do this?
Right.
Yeah. So I think the first and most important thing is self-understanding, like knowing yourself. And when I got out of treatment, it was like, okay, now you need to learn, right? Like and you know, it was down to things like, what do you even like to eat? Like, I trained my brain to like not like carbs, right? But then I was like, wait, like, do I even like pasta? Do I even like bread? Like, I haven't really had them and enjoyed them in so long, right? So it was training like that, but it's also, you know, in a different way. It was like, I always say, like, when I left treatment, I felt like a little kid again, where I just got to explore and like make all of my own things again. I couldn't be influenced by other people on what to wear, what to look like, or what to eat. And I really just got to like be this kid and explore the world and decide what I liked and what I didn't like. And in that, right, I grew up, you know, emotionally. I was like, I'm not an emotional person. Like, I'm like a hard ass and I don't care about blah, blah. And I am super emotional. I'm a very like emotional person. I very much care about things that I love and that affect me. And, you know, even though it sounds like, okay, like that's great, right? I had identified as somebody who wasn't like that for so long that I needed to understand, like, who I was and what I was, but also accept that. Like, it's okay to be like that. And even a lot of my negative things, right? Like, you're somebody who is I'm very, very naturally like reactive, or I grew up very reactive. And I was like, instead of pretending I'm not reactive, I am reactive, right? But what do I do to make that better or make that manageable, right? Because being reactive wasn't a good thing for me and isn't a good thing for me in a lot of situations, right? To react immediately and very emotionally to things. So having a really good understanding of myself and accepting all of those good and bad parts of myself, and not working to, you know, change them, but working to manage them in a way that worked best for me at that stage and in that point in my life.
I love that.
Yeah, well,
I relate to that too.
Same.
I feel like it,
Yeah.
I'm sure a lot of people, you know, also can. It's like you kind of write this narrative for yourself and you think, you know, like, this is it, this is who I am for the rest of your life. But it's like, you can rewrite that at any time.
Exactly.
Or you know, you don't have to change it. You can just accept it. And
yeah.
I think that's beautiful. I like that.
Yeah.
What is something that no one tells you about a comeback like this to a physical degree and mental, I guess? But
Learning something and applying it one time is not forming a habit, or is not an indication of how you're going to continue making decisions like that, right? Like, for me, you know, when it comes to food, or even, you know, mentally, like mental decisions that I needed to make, it was, you know, okay, like when I get really anxious around food, like what do I do, right? So I try and calm myself down. What do I do to do that, right? Like, I start thinking about all of the facts about food, right? Like, is me eating this really going to like affect my weight? No, like, me having one meal is not going to affect my weight, right? In a drastic way. So it's like thinking about the facts, and then also, you know, thinking about it mentally, like, how do I start changing my mindset around this? So doing that one time is great, right? But it's about being consistent in doing that, right? Like, being consistent and making all of those decisions the same way and using the same thinking pattern, the same thought process. And that's when it starts to become inherent, right? Now with food, I don't have to, and not all of the time, sometimes I do feel like I'm really struggling, right? But when a plate of food gets put in front of me that maybe I'm not super comfortable with, or, you know, I have like very negative kind of feedback or thoughts to from my past, it takes me, you know, 2 seconds to immediately, and it's more just something that happens in my brain where it's like, okay, we're going to be okay. We're good. We can move on from this. Right. But it took years and years and years of practicing that, and sitting there for 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 10 minutes, crying, all of these things, right? To make that something that just naturally happens within me now. So I think something that nobody tells you is it's a lot of really, really, really hard work. Consistent hard work.
If anyone's watching this at home, or if anyone is just maybe thinking about this in general and feeling like they're on that line, right, of like, do I need help or do I not need help? Like, I guess, what advice would you have for them of how to just make that determining factor, or how to think about seeking help?
I think that everybody these days struggles with food or body image or weight or exercise. And I mean, do I necessarily think that everybody needs to go into the intensive treatment center that I was in? No. But do I think a lot more people could benefit from it? Yes. Or some form of therapy in some way. And I think what I'll say is that when I first started struggling, a lot of people were very quick to suggest like talk therapy, which is like traditional, like you go to a therapist and you talk to them and they talk to you, right? And I started doing that, but I was like, this is so unhelpful. And I realized that I couldn't explain what was going on in my head. So for a therapist to actually help you, they need to understand what's going on. And the only way that I could have done that in that form of therapy was to communicate it, but I didn't have the language. I didn't have the understanding of why my head went from there to there, and I couldn't explain it. So in that, the therapist couldn't help me. So I I started exploring different forms of therapy, and CBT therapy or DBT therapy, which is, so CBT, I think it was the most helpful in that stage of my life. So it's cognitive behavioral therapy. And it's really like connecting when you do something, like realizing why you do it. What's the reason that you're reacting like this? And in what ways does that make sense, kind of thing. And you can Google CBT therapy, and like as soon as you do, the sheet will come up. And I filled out thousands and thousands of those sheets. And it really, really, really helped me understand why I was so terrified of food and why I had this relationship with it. Because for me, it was like gaining weight to me. It wasn't just gaining weight, right? It wasn't just like not fitting into clothes. It was I in my head, like looking a certain way and being a certain weight was connected to so many negative things that, you know, were within my own family or within my own, you know, societal kind of norms. And obviously it was very much exaggerated in my head. So drawing that out and making those connections was imperative for me to be able to communicate about how I was feeling. Right now I can talk through all of the things that go on into my head and all of my, you know, problems or issues that I face, but at the time I couldn't. So I would say that that's something that would be super beneficial for a lot of people, like looking into different forms of therapy. Because even if you're not struggling with eating or your body, I think therapy is super important for everybody.
I think that's amazing. And then going off of that, now that you're on the other side, right?
Mm-hmm.
Made this comeback from, you know, before your treatment to getting through the treatment and then successfully sticking to your healing journey. What tools would you say that you currently use to kind of keep you on the right track, whether it's mentally, physically, you know, are there any things that really help you now that you're, you know, in recovery and that, you know, this is now your new life, your new normal? Like, are there any things that you like swear by or that you would, you know, recommend to somebody at this stage in recovery?
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of things, like being consistent with, you know, recovery, I guess. So like therapy is super important. Even if I'm feeling amazing for a long period of time, it's like something I know I need to do, right? At least once a week. A lot of like inner work as well. Like as I grow as a person through my recovery, but also in different parts of my life, right? Like in different friendships and relationships and in my career, different things will always come up, right? Like I guess what I thought when I was always like, once I figure out this eating thing, everything's going to be okay and everything's going to make sense. And it definitely got me there. Like it definitely, like then I was, you know, able to start doing more things, but it was like, wait, like as I grow and as, you know, now that I've recovered or now that I can manage this stuff, I'm able to, you know, maybe be in a relationship or have a good relationship with my friends and have a better relationship with my family and have a career. But in everybody's life, right? There's different things that come up in all of these different scenarios that we face as we continue to grow in our lives. So being consistent with that, I know that if I'm not okay mentally, nothing else can be okay and nobody else can be okay. So I think another thing is always putting myself first, which I had a really big problem with for a really long time. So I know that if I'm not okay, I can't help anybody else. So I'm number one all the time.
Through your whole journey, what was the best advice you received along the way?
So a therapist once said this to me, and it was something that really stuck with me and that I practice all the time. And it's the only thing that you need to focus on is not to make things worse for yourself. So, and that for me was really helpful when I was having like a really big, I was freaking out, or I was having like these like crazy adverse reactions and, you know, feeling super depressed and all of these like very strong emotions that felt really negative. And I was, you know, we're always like, okay, how do we fix things? How do we make them better, right? That's just something that we all do as people, right? Like, you're feeling like this, how do we make it better? Even if you tell a friend or a family member, right? They're always just trying to make it better. And she was like, instead of trying to focus on, because when you're in like those really, really deep emotional holes, you can't make things better, right? When you get to a certain point, there's no like turning back right away, right? It's not like, I need to hear this one thing or do this one thing and I'm going to immediately feel okay. So she always said to me, like, don't focus on that because you're going to disappoint yourself all the time. Like, if you focus on just trying to be okay and be better, it's not going to work, right? You're going to be upset with yourself because you're not going to be able to get yourself to that point. So what I want you to focus on is not to make it worse. So when you're feeling that way, what makes it feel worse, right? And one of those things is having, having, I guess, unrealistic expectations of how you should be feeling at the time, right? So making yourself feel better, doing all of these things, like wanting to just be completely okay. So she's like, sit in like that shit and realize, try and think why you're there, but just don't make it worse for yourself, right? Don't turn to, whatever that may be, any like negative things that you feel like help you in that point or make things worse, right? Don't go have a conversation with your mom if she's someone that triggers you, right? Don't like go and binge eat a bunch of food because you're feeling like super anxious. Don't, turn to drugs or alcohol. So I think that's something that really allowed me to start having more realistic expectations about what I was dealing with and actually help deal with them much better.
I think that's so helpful and so important because, not even just with, physical disorders or anything, any setback or any failure in life, your first instinct is to be like, all right, like, how long is it going to take until I'm better? And like, how do I get that? And sometimes it's just like, that is great advice. Just like, don't worry about getting from here to here. Just don't go from here to here.
Yeah.
And I think that's, so important for anybody.
Yeah.
Trying to rush the progress.
Yeah. And this is gonna sound silly, but I use this now in like normal everyday life. So like the other day I woke up and I realized that I hadn't sent something through for this really big project I'm working on. I was supposed to send it on like a Monday and now it was a Thursday. And I was like, oh shit, right? Like I knew I fucked up. So I woke up and I was like, okay, like I'm freaking out. I know, like, how do I not make this worse for myself? So I was like, okay, like making it worse would be to just like keep leaving it, right? For me, like that would be to keep letting, whoever I was supposed to respond to. So I was like, I woke up, immediately sent an email back. And I was like, hey, so sorry, like still working on this. We'll have this to you, like set expectations with them. We'll have this to you by the end of the day. And then it was like, I felt like I wasn't making it worse for myself because what I usually would do, right, is wake up and start working on it frantically and then, not waste, but I would work on it for a certain amount of time or I would do it like rushed and it wouldn't be what I wanted, right? So at that point, it was like, how do I not make this worse? That would make it worse for me because I would be so anxious and in doing all of that. And I would have this expectation to make it perfect, right? So, and, just an example of like how, even though that's super helpful and I learned that for those like very intense situations, it's actually also really helpful in all of the other stuff I do too, right? That isn't as important or emotional, I guess.
If you could give any final words of wisdom to anybody watching at home, Team ELEVARI, anybody looking, to make some type of recovery or change or physical or mental in their own life, final words of wisdom or advice.
Yeah, I think success looks different to everybody is probably, I think, one of the most important things that I have to remind myself every day, because at different stages of my life when I was struggling, it was like, to me, success was being thin. And then to me, success was making a certain amount of money every year. Mm-hmm. To me, success was being in a relationship, right? And, for me, I measure success now in ways that are, I guess, in very reasonable ways. Like for me, if I'm making $10 a day and I really want to make $12 a day, like that's a reasonable goal or reasonable, piece of success, right? And it doesn't mean I'm not successful if I don't reach that, but for me to grow and be, more successful in that way, those are like some milestones that I'll hit. But 2 years ago, 3 years ago, me getting out of bed was successful, right? So now when I think of success, right, it's different. It's different at every stage in your life. So you can't expect everybody's success to look the same or be measured in the same way. Because if I didn't allow myself to, measure that piece in my life and success being like eating 3 meals a day, getting out of bed, going to work for an hour, right? If I didn't allow myself to use those as things of success, because we're humans, right? Like we want to feel like we're being successful and we're growing and we're changing, right? So I think a lot of people have like very like adverse reactions to like success. I don't measure success or whatever, but I not that I need it to hit a certain thing, but I always say like, am I more successful in what I'm trying to do the next day? And whether that be, financially or mentally, right? Like mental success is a huge thing. Am I reacting to situations better? Am I making better decisions? Am I doing this? But again, it looks so different for everybody at such different times. So instead of, listening to a podcast, I always used to listen to things so that I could take that advice and put it into motion. And it was like, well, how is this person dealing with this? What do they eat, right? That was like the first thing when it came to the eating disorder. What does this person eat? They have an amazing body. I need to eat exactly what they're eating and work out exactly like they're doing, right? We know that if everybody in the world ate the same, worked out the same, we would all still look different, right? So how can we expect that mentally doing the exact same thing as somebody else is going to give us the same outcome, right? So now when I listen to things, it's like, I'm going to listen to this because it's either going to apply to me now or it's going to apply to me later on in my life. And at least I'll have that insight when I get there or when I need it. You don't need to be doing whatever every successful person is doing. And success doesn't always have to be looking a certain way and being a Fitspo or making $1 million a year. Because to me, I still very much value success and having really close relationships with my friends and people in my life and things that, we normally may not deem as being a success, right? But I take value in those a lot more than the monetary or the physical things.
I love what you said about not following everything, to a T. It's like every person's story is going to be different, and, take every piece of advice with a grain. What is it? With a grain of salt.
Brain.
My brain is not working today. But also it's like, you like to see other people's stories and hear what worked for them and see what made them such a success as a source of inspiration. But again, it's like, take what you want and leave the rest. Like it's not everything that they've done is going to work for you. But if you can get like one piece of advice or one, even just inspiration or motivation, then I think that's the healthiest way to look at it, because,
totally.
That's true. Success is not going to look the same. Mm-hmm. Nobody's going to have the same path because everybody's story is different.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Thank you guys for having me.
Yeah. So inspiring.
Yeah.
Honestly, you gave me chills multiple times. It was like,
100%.
It was really good.
And it's, I think it's really important right now, especially, younger and younger kids, and not just women, like you're not just females, males too.
Totally.
Access to social media, and you're seeing all these photoshopped pictures, right? And you're seeing everybody's highlight reels, and it can cause these like mental and emotional issues for people, which will then turn to disorders. So I think it's, really important to address the other side of it. And like,
totally.
I think this is really helpful. And I know it's definitely going to help a lot of people out there.
Comparison. What do they say? Comparison is the thief of joy.
Yeah.
Like so many people come to me, they're like, how did you, how did you do what you're doing? Like, you always seem to be like so happy. And I mean, I am like, I'm definitely the happiest I've ever been in my life. I'm the most like, you know, mentally like focused on just being like better, like being better to myself and being a better friend and a better like partner and a better daughter and all of these things. And, you know, they're like, oh, like, you know, a lot of people say like, oh, you're so lucky. You're so lucky. And I'm like, yeah, I definitely am lucky. You know, I have I was born into a great family and all of these things, but I didn't just get here because somebody put this in front of my lap one day and said, go take this and go with it. Right. It was, there's no,
Hell yeah.
Yeah, there's no such thing as luck when it comes to stuff like that. And yeah. It takes a lot of hard work. I mean, I work hard every single day in my career and what I'm doing, but also just to keep this level of like, you know, of being who I want to be and who I am, right? Every day I wake up being like, yeah, like, do I want to fall back into, you know, do I want to feel the way that I did? No. But do I feel tempted to fall back into those patterns and habits? Like every single day, of course I do. But it's having that like mental, and I want to like, you know, I want to use the term like mental toughness. Like I have to be tough on myself sometimes and be like, listen, like this isn't what you want to do. This isn't what you need to do. And even though I feel like I really want to do it and that's what I want to do, and I think I'll feel happier doing that, right? I needed to figure out what my actual measures of success were.